So Beowulf probably means Beowulf, which is just the poet's kind of very poetic way of saying bear. Because just like a wolf hunts, a bee is hunted by the bear because it's after the honey. You know this from Winnie the Pooh. So, Nordic bear warriors, those who wore the bear sark, which means bear shirt. That's where we get our words berserk and our word berserker. Both words are associated with like flying into a violent rage and being super crazy. But it's actually really well respected in the warrior culture of the Vikings. So, in what's called the Edda, in the Edda of the 13th century Icelandic poet Snorri Sturluson, main source of a lot of the stuff that we know about Vikings today, says that berserkers wore no armor and that they were as mad as dogs, as strong as bears, and that they dressed in animal skins of bears, wolves, or boars, depending on which animal cult they belonged to. Animal cults, essentially, it was kind of like a totemic relationship. They believed that doing certain things and kind of giving reverence to this one particular kind of animal gave them special powers associated with that animal. So, one 9th century poem describes berserkers this way: the berserks howled, battle was on their minds, the wolfskins growled and shook their spears. So, although technically berserk refers to the bear shirt, we do see it seen in primary literature as referring to those wearing boar skins, wolf skins, and bear skins. Although we do have a specific word used when it's those wearing wolf skins specifically. Sometimes they are singled out as the Ulfwenar, the wolf warriors. So, be it in a wolf skin or a boar skin or a bear skin, these were gentlemen who disdained wearing normal armors, so they didn't wear the armor of the normal Viking raiders, and they fought differently in battle. Now, these are some of the Lewis chessmen, chess pieces that were carved in the 12th century, and you'll notice that you have kings and queens, and everybody's looking, if bug-eyed, a little normal, until you get to the berserker pieces. The berserker pieces are carved in a special way that denotes that they are the berserkers, and they are shown gnawing on their shields. You got one of them right here in the back. And that's a behavior that is not just something that the carver of the Lewis chessmen decided to include there. That is something that is mentioned in a number of Old Norse sources that illustrated their legendary fury in battle, and also was just kind of a behavior that they had. There's one, not always a good idea, there's one account where a berserker was gnawing on his shield, and another enemy came up and kicked the bottom, and it ripped his jaw clean off. I think I may have linked that in the speaker notes. So, berserks were said to fly into a rage. They would foam at the mouth. They'd have inhuman strength and inhuman endurance. They'd sometimes be unable to tell friend from foe. And there's been a lot of speculation. There's some really, you can go down a rabbit hole about how they induced that state. There are some people who believe it was a drug-induced state. For a long time, they said like fly argic mushrooms. Then they thought it was belladonna or another plant in the nightshade family. And now they're starting to think it might be certain like neurotoxic alcohol beverages. So who knows? But end result, they were very brave. They were very crazy. They showed no fear in battle. So there you have it. Now, as we move along, the Lewis chessmen are also sometimes called the Ig chessmen because they were found in Ig Parish near Igby on the Isle of Lewis, which is in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. So Lewis chessmen is the one you'll normally hear them called, but the other name is not incorrect. They're both equally correct, and as a matter of fact, the less common name is actually the more specific one. It's very important to remember that even though this is a decidedly Norse story, a very kind of Viking story, it's also a story that has some decidedly German flavors that creep in. Um, there's the very well known, perhaps the best known German legend is about Sigmund, the dragon slayer. And he appears in Beowulf in one of two tales within a tale, where in the course of the story, someone's like, oh, yeah, let's tell a story. And then instead of just kind of jumping to the end of the story, the audience gets to sit through that story as well. A tale within a tale kind of thing. Another example of that would be like the movie Princess Bride. The movie Princess Bride is actually not about the characters that we think of, Fessick and, the Six-Fingered Man and all of those characters. It's actually about a little boy who's sick at home and his grandfather. If you watch the movie, that's where the movie starts. It's where the movie essentially ends. And at points throughout the movie, you see them. But the story that we actually kind of care about is the tale within a tale in Princess Bride. The little boy is sick. Grandpa's going to sit with him because mom and dad aren't there. They're at work. He's going to read him a story. And then the story that we get to experience is, of course, the story that is the Princess Bride. Now, same thing happens in Beowulf, but the story within the story is not the centerpiece like it is in Princess Bride. So you have two small stories that are told. One about a member of another tribe called the Finns, and then, of course, Sigmund the Dragon Slayer. And the Sigmund the Dragon Slayer story is important for two reasons. Number one, it kind of illustrates the fact that, renown is important. So they're telling this tale even though everyone knows the tale. And so as an audience member now, reading the book, we're like, well, why are they telling this story if everybody already knows it? Well, because this is an era of oral tradition, and how you pass on stories is you keep telling them. Everybody knows them, but you keep telling them. And as a matter of fact, they make a point of saying that they really enjoy the way that the skald, the bard, the storyteller tells one of the stories. They're like, oh, he tells this story the best. He's the best at this one. And when he is praising Beowulf, he references the story of Sigmund, the Dragon Slayer, which is foreshadowing, because what we will see in the end of the story of Beowulf is Beowulf as a Dragon Slayer as well. Now, next couple slides come to us courtesy of the lady you see on your screen right now, Dr. Eleanor Parker. She is a professor of Old English literature, Middle English literature, and Old Norse literature at Brasenose College, which is part of the University of Oxford, one of the most prestigious universities in the English-speaking world, and it is in England. Now, her research primarily is focused on historical narratives. So mostly her kind of bread and butter is stuff like Beowulf. She focuses on things made in England between around 1000 and around 1400. And she specifically likes those things that talk about the Danes in England. So this is why Beowulf is an area of special concern to her. She is an award-winning historian, well-published, a number of peer-reviewed journals, working on a book right now, serves as a columnist for History Today and BBC History Magazine. That's the British broadcast company, and BBC History Extra. She's also published a translation of Old English and Middle English poetry. In short, she is very smart, very qualified individual who is going to tell us a little bit more about Beowulf. So, she says, in reflecting on these stories of warriors and kings, Beowulf is interested in different kinds of power and exploring how physical strength, mental determination, and political sovereignty should each best be used. Sovereignty is kind of your control. The poem also meditates on the limitations of human power, especially on the fact that it all must come to an end, even heroes die. Beowulf has the strength of 30 men and becomes a mighty king, but he is only human. He doesn't have power over the natural world, or the seasons, or over death. Since earthly power is restricted in this way, Human rulers need to learn to understand their own limits and act wisely within them. This is going to come up again in a little bit. We're going to talk about mirrors of princes again, like we did in 7th grade. So, Dr. Parker continues, it's important to understand that the Beowulf is a Christian poem about pagan, non-Christian characters. It's set in a period before the Scandinavian peoples had converted to Christianity. 500 AD is where it's set. But the poet and his audience were themselves Christians, because it comes out around 1000. So, despite this, the poet is sympathetic towards his pagan characters, and Beowulf strikes a delicate balance. The characters we are meant to admire, including the hero, express beliefs about God that would not be alien to Christian thought. They are presented not believing in the Norse pantheon of gods, as we would expect, Loki, Odin, Thor, etc., but in a single all-powerful creator who governs world events, like in Christianity. So it's kind of anachronistic, something that's out of time. It doesn't make sense in terms of the actual historicity of the timeline, but Beowulf is a Christian allegory. The person who wrote it was Christian, and you see that kind of throughout the thread of their writing, both in biblical allusions, but also in kind of the construction of the tale. Dr. Parker continues, God, the guardian of, quoting from Beowulf, God, the guardian of glory, may ever work wonder after wonder. That line is something that Hrothgar tells Beowulf after his victory. An Anglo-Saxon Christian audience would have recognized and felt sympathy for these ideas. But at the same time, the poem is clear that these characters are still pagans and cannot hope for Christian salvation. The story is given added poignancy by the fact that when Beowulf dies, it really is the end. His body is turned to smoke on his funeral pyre. The only afterlife he can hope for is to be remembered by his people. No Valhalla awaits him. In Norse tales, you will always have that concept of Valhalla. The Valkyries are going to come and take away the souls of the warriors who have died in battle, and they will go to Valhalla and they will enjoy essentially battle and partying with Odin and Thor for the rest of eternity. That's not mentioned in Beowulf, because Beowulf is a Christian story about Norse characters. All right. So, talked about the characters themselves in another video in, I think, session 2. So, oral traditions, parallels, and allusions, not illusions, are all important in Beowulf. Hrothgar warns Beowulf against being like the wicked Eramod, whose anger and arrogance almost destroyed his people. And later, when the Danes are celebrating Grendel's defeat, their court skald, poet, remember, he's going to heap praise on Beowulf by comparing him to Sigmund, the legendary Germanic dragon slayer, and that's foreshadowing as well. So you're going to have parallelism, where you're like, hey, look at this, we're going to compare these things, and we're also going to, in some cases, contrast them. So, one of the ways that you can look at Beowulf is as a so-called mirror of princes. If you remember back to 7th grade, we talked about mirrors of princes when we talked about Machiavelli's The Prince, which is absolutely the best known mirror of princes. The idea as a mirror of princes is written to teach young members of the noble class how to be good and wise rulers when they suddenly take power or have it thrust on them, or maybe eventually they live a long life and eventually inherit power. But the point is, it teaches you how to be a good ruler by telling you, do this, don't do that. So, in Beowulf, we are told that rulers should be generous, prudent, that means make wise decisions, and should take time and reflect on their own decisions. This will make you a good ruler. And in contrast, in Beowulf, we are told that you should not oppress your people. You should not become tyrannical. You shouldn't be a tyrant. And you shouldn't put your own needs ahead of those of your people, because this would make you a bad ruler. Now, something that is a little bit different in Beowulf than most mirrors of princes is it also includes essentially a mirror of princes that's much kind of smaller and shorter, doesn't go into the same amount of detail for warriors. And so it says that warriors should be brave and loyal to their companions and always true to their word. They should keep their oaths and promises because that makes you a good warrior. And on the other hand, they're told don't be reckless because being reckless will make you a bad warrior. Now, there are also some shots taken about cowardice throughout Beowulf, because this is a warrior culture where bravery is very important. But it doesn't specifically say, like, hey, don't be a coward. That would make you a bad warrior. The reason for that is that's kind of this being a warrior culture. That's a given. They understand that to be an effective warrior, you can't be running afraid. So, let's jump ahead. One of the kind of weird words for a lot of people is this one here. This is atheling. The atheling means someone who is kind of a prince, a member of the noble class. So during the early years of Anglo-Saxon rule, you'll see this used. Now, it's in literally the opening line, depending on which translation you use. So that's the reason we're going to bring it up right there. Beowulf is bookended. There's something that happens at the beginning that also happens at the end. So it's like bookends. They hold the books up on a bookshelf. It's bookended by a funeral, a specific funeral at the beginning and the end, a funeral for a king. Now, at the very beginning of the story, the funeral is that of Skjoldskjefling, the shield chieftain, the first king of the Danes. Now, that makes him the legendary ancestor of the Danish and some of the English, so he is legendary. We don't have any historical evidence for him, like we do for Hygelac and Hrothgar and Harrowat, the Hall. But he's kind of who in legend they trace themselves back to, kind of like the English also revere the legendary Arthur. Yeah, there was probably an Arthur that lived, and we've kind of narrowed that down, but we don't have like it was this guy, he is here, that kind of thing. Now, when Chieftain dies, he is sent out to sea in a treasure ship. So in other words, they put his body in a ship, and rather than burying it, because sometimes Vikings would literally take a giant ship like you would put at sea, and they would bury it in the ground. They'd put a mound over it. That's not what happens here. They instead put him on the ship, and they sail it out. Now, a lot of times they also practiced burning. They would cremate their dead. Sometimes they would put those two things together. Sometimes you would put a ship on the water and then they would ignite it. This is not what happens in the beginning of the story. So in contrast, you have the ship but not the fire at the beginning. And at the end, you're going to have the fire but not the ship. So just kind of, bear that in mind. So we tend to think Viking funeral, it's a ship and it's on fire. This, you're going to have those two elements split, ship in the beginning, fire in the end. So it says he is sent out to sea in a treasure ship. Remember, those ships tend to be packed with grave goods, valuables, things of that nature. The story tells us, quote, no one can say who received that cargo. Now, there's double meaning there. So on the one hand, they mean we don't know where it went. It wasn't like we followed it and took the gold back. And the other, the more important meaning, the deeper meaning, is that, remember, pagans in the Christian narrative, they don't know where he ended up. The cargo. Did he go up or down, as they like to say? So, there you go. The Viking funeral as we tend to think of it. And we're going to have that, split into two pieces. Now, the funeral at the end of Beowulf is, as one might expect, in a story about Beowulf's life, it's for Beowulf. Now, when his funeral occurs at the end of the book, the following line from the beginning of the book and Chieftain's funeral is repeated. Theithwas good king. That was a good king. And that's a literary device called repetition, and because of the way it's used, it's also bookending. But the idea is that they're going to hold up Sheafson, who kind of all of the readers are going to be familiar with as that legendary king, and they know that he was a good king, but they're going to say it anyway. That was a good king. That was a good king. And then at the end, when they say, "Oh man, that was a good king," we're going to draw that parallel. Oh, he is a good king, like Sheafson was a good king. Oh, I got it. He was really that was a great king. So, Herawat, the mead hall, the hall where drinking occurred and revelry and feasting, was a very large hall, and like I said, it actually is something that we believe we have found the location of and partially excavated. All those white dots are where there would have been upright posts to hold up the roof of the hall, and you have a kind of two-story house in the background, a farmhouse, which are pretty reasonably large. And so you can see this is a rather sizable building. So that was the Hall of Hrothgar, and of course, Erebor was supposed to be more fine than any hall ever anywhere in the world. So basically, he's got a problem. He built this great hall. They had a lot of great parties, and then got a monster problem. That's where we'll pick up next time. Thanks, guys.